This right here is a computer. So is this and this. Depending on where you look in time, a computer comes in many different forms. It's never a static thing, even though day to day we can be fooled into thinking a computer is one static thing. It is not. If you ask the youth what's a computer, they're going to say something like this, a smartphone. And if you go back in time in the 90s and ask them what's a computer, it's going to be a completely different answer, and both are right. The current incarnation of a computer is only limited by the technology of the current day. But generally speaking, I think the trend here is pretty obvious. Computers are moving in the direction of being more minimal, intuitive, and more capable. In recent time, the dominant form computers have been coming in is a laptop, but the argument can be made that we are transitioning to the era of the tablet as technology advances. After all, tablets are more minimal, intuitive to use, and increasingly more capable devices than laptops. To this end, today I'm bringing you guys a very interesting comparison between a laptop and an iPad. The laptop here is budget, only around $600, and it is unequivocally a great value. A 6-core Ryzen 5 CPU, 16 gigs of RAM, an RTX 2050 for legit gaming. Then we have an iPad Pro 12.9-inch with the M1 chip. So it's a couple of years old at this point, and it's a good representation for the current iPad Air, which has the same M1 chip and cost $600. So we're dabbling in the same price range, and both devices are playing to their strengths. So the laptop is using its extra size to pack in powerful hardware, a dedicated GPU, and the iPad is running the next-gen ARM chips, which are much more efficient and smaller. You might even be surprised that when it comes to the CPU performance, it is very comparable between these two devices, with the M1 iPad actually taking the lead. According to Geekbench, the single core is 2,246 and multi 8,074. The more traditional Ryzen 5 6-core CPU has a single core of 1,700 and multi of 6,623. To me, these numbers indicate that tablets' smaller size, lack of active cooling, is no longer a handicap like it was in the past. If you think back to a random year like 2016, tablets were always a step behind a good, solid, say i7 laptop. But technology continues to advance, it's an amazing thing, and via the modern ARM chips like the M1, the gap has been officially closed. And speaking of closing the gap, most tablets finally figured out their first-party keyboard attachments as well. I use my iPad in this format most of the time to do work, and it's a very satisfactory experience. I don't feel myself longing to go back to a laptop. And then, when I want to activate relaxation mode, I can just rip off the screen from the keyboard attachment, and we have that greater versatility thanks to this modern computing format. When it comes to the laptop, it is just as comfortable to use while I'm at my desk, but I never sit down on the couch and relax with my laptop. That feels equivalent to talking on a landline. It's just an outdated concept and something that is completely unnecessary in the modern day. Now, even though the CPU performance is comparable between the two, that's not the end of the story, because the laptop does rock a dedicated GPU, the RTX 2050. I've already done a detailed walkthrough of the benchmarks in a previous video, but broadly speaking, this GPU can run most games at high 1080p settings with no problems. The M1 chip does have a decent integrated GPU that's 8 cores, and it captures about 60% of the performance in terms of frames per second as the RTX 2050. So when you factor in the slightly faster CPU speeds and the slightly slower GPU speeds, the iPad overall is largely as capable as this laptop when it comes to heavy computing tasks such as video rendering and 3D modeling. The big difference, however, is the software. For gaming, many applications just don't run yet on mobile. Think Steam, big title games like GTA, Overwatch, Fallout 4, and literally thousands of others. But as we established, the hardware to run these games on mobile is now present. And given the new reality, there's now no reason why these applications and games can't eventually migrate over to mobile. The technology now allows for it, but this is a new development, so the industry will need some time to catch up to this and make a new version of the software for these mobile platforms. Then moving on from the performance, we have a long list of secondary differences between laptops and tablets. So the iPad, for example, has a super high-res display with mini LED technology. The colors are fantastic, and overall the screen is just phenomenal. And this laptop has a much more regular 1080p IPS panel, but it is fast at 144 Hz, which is a really nice benefit for gaming. It adds to the smoothness of the gameplay. For ports, tablets have USB Type-C pretty much across the board. Laptops are moving in this direction, but many still carry legacy ports because after all, laptops were designed in an era before USB Type-C. Battery life on tablets is far superior, mostly due to the more efficient ARM processors. Laptops like this have active cooling, which may or may not be a benefit when it comes to overheating and thermal throttling. I say this because obviously fans do help to cool down the machine, but I viewed more as a bandage solution. Ideally, you want to have a chip that's advanced enough that it doesn't need active cooling in order to not overheat, like we see in modern day tablets. As far as I'm aware, no tablet or smartphone has a fan inside of it, and overheating is extremely rare, even though the performance is really good as we previously established. And finally, size, portability, and usability. Tablets, being the newer computing format, easily wins in all of these categories. Now, if you take a trip back to 2010, when Steve Jobs first announced the iPad, people complained that it was just a big iPod Touch. And I gotta say, at the time, they were mostly right. It wasn't as powerful as a laptop. The software was in its infancy. And if you wanted to do anything aside from web browsing, a laptop was clearly still needed. But even in 2010, the iPad was onto something. And 14 years later, I think tablets have finally realized their full potential. Where iPads used to be the specialty device just for web browsing and consumer content, it now appears that laptops are those specialty devices dedicated for just gaming and running a few select programs that are still stuck in the past that don't have a mobile version. So back to the timeline here. Generally speaking, I think it's safe to say that we have moved from computers primarily looking like laptops to now looking like tablets. This is, in the mid-2020s, what a computer is now. But if you still need a laptop for gaming, coding, random things like that, I think this laptop is a fantastic, scratch at, the best one at $600. I'll leave a link below the video so you guys can check it out. And personally, I use this laptop for gaming, but everything else I do, including the production of this video and running this entire YouTube channel, I do on my iPad.